Welcome to day 3, session 2 of the virtual school on IP. The topic for this session is intellectual property risks during COVID and work from home culture. Our speaker for this session is Advocate Sai Sushanth, who is the CEO of Sushanth IT Law Associates, an exclusive cyber law consulting firm. He is a cyber law expert and techno-legal consultant from Hyderabad. He is a law graduate and he has procured his master's in cyber law and cyber security from the National Law University, Jodhpur. Mr. Sushanth is one of the 45 cyber law compliance auditors in India. He has also conducted many cyber law awareness workshops at various levels, including schools, colleges, and corporates. Besides, he has mentored quite a few professionals, MNCs, and startups on cyber law and similar subjects. Furthermore, he had authored an e-book titled Websites and Indian Cyber Law and published several articles in national and international journals. His cyber laws, cyber forensics, cybercrime investigation and analysis, cybersecurity, cloud computing, legal aspects, mobile law, digital evidence analysis, IPR, IT law compliance. He has published and presented a number of papers on cyber laws and allied subjects in many international and national journals and conferences. It is indeed an honor to have you with us in today's session, and we welcome you, sir. For any queries during the session, participants may type the same box and we shall put the same to the speaker. Now I would like to hand over the session to Mr. Sai Sushanth and would request him to make his presentation on the topic today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa, and good evening, participants, and welcome to this session on IP risks during COVID-19 and work from home culture. In fact, it's been a very enlightening day because I believe that this is the kind of topic which is going to be so relevant to the present times because we are all in the phase of COVID-19, and I believe that once we get victorious against COVID-19, there are going to be a lot of IP legal issues that are likely to emerge. I believe that the world is now going to see a new cyber world order where there's going to be a lot of different kinds of emergence of cyber legal principles, and intellectual property also, needless to say, will be playing a very critical and a crucial role per se. So I think this kind of a scenario is the required one. And then I believe that FICCI Forum has once again demonstrated thought leadership, coming up with this most relevant kind of a topic, because I see there are a lot of webinars happening across different kinds of subjects, but very rarely we find something happening on IP issues specifically during the period of COVID-19 and work from home per se. So I think I must once again congratulate the organizers, as also Divyesh and also Mona Lisa, for this wonderful opportunity. And I hope that we try to dwell on certain kinds of issues that are arising during this foresaid period. And I hope that we have some good interactive discussions at the end of the session. And I think webinars like this will act as key catalysts in trying to come up with some kinds of answers to the evolving IP legal jurisprudence during this phase. So let's hope and see that we can have some interactive discussions and deliberations, and hope that we make this seminar a more productive one. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think already hackers and cyber criminals are on the horizon, and then they've already started to move very quickly in trying to steal the COVID vaccine secrets in a kind of intellectual property war. I think there are lots of labs and laboratories which are already being hit with cyber attacks left, right, and center. And one of the major concerns is to steal the intellectual property relating to the COVID vaccine per se. I think these are just illustrations to just give us some kind of an understanding that IP breaches are going to be constantly prevailing over the set period for the purpose of financial or otherwise intellectual property gain. So I think these are illustrations, and even Dr. Reddy's laboratories also recently been hit with a cyber attack. I believe that the intellectual property has become the new playground for the cyber criminals and hackers per se. I think it will be very interesting to try to understand the IP legal kind of regime during this period of COVID-19 and work from home culture per se, because it's a new kind of a paradigm which hasn't happened so far, and I believe that the governments and the laboratories and also a lot of private organizations are thoroughly unprepared with regard to this kind of a scenario, and more specifically in the light of intellectual property, because it's at this minute that intellectual property is assuming greater significance because everything revolves around data and information per se. So when there is a creation of data and creation of human mind, coupled with the kind of expertise and expert domains that people are working into, I think intellectual property will play a very critical role in a kind of coming up with some kind of monetization, and then some kinds of IP assets are also going to be playing very critical roles in the present corporate era, where we are all in the phase of work from home. So let's try to go and look at some cutting edge issues, and let's also discuss the kinds of strategies. I have also some case studies that I thought I would share with all of you. These are just my experiences of the IP related issues during COVID-19 and work from home scenarios. So without the naming the companies, I thought I should just share these real time scenarios with you so that you have some practical understanding apart from just gaining the theoretical understanding as well. The next slide, please. I believe constantly that IP regime would have to be comprising of these elements during the work from home scenario and the COVID scenario. Specifically, the ownership of IP will play a very critical role. When I talk of IP ownership, all along, it's a different subject altogether because we had employees work from the physical premises of the office or during this phase, I believe it's a different ball game altogether because there are going to be two elements that will be acting as a key to determine IP ownership. Number one, it's going to be the IP agreements. Number two, it's also going to be the kind of work that employees are performing using their laptops or using the laptops provided by the company. So in this scenario, the IP ownership is going to assume a totally different direction altogether because this is a different kind of a scenario altogether. Now, when you look at the other part of the scenario, IP licensing strategies will also be looked into by companies, and failing which we can also see a lot of breach of the IP license terms, specifically during this period of COVID-19 and work from home cultures per se. And IP infringements are also likely to emerge as the new normal as we go on to talk about the work from home culture, given the thorough unpreparedness that companies and corporates have during the period of work from home, specifically in the light of protection of intellectual property. I think these are some cutting issues that organizations are actually facing primarily from an intellectual property perspective during this work from home kind of a culture. Next slide, please. So when I talk of ownership, there are going to be different kinds of IP that's going to be made applicable. We have the trademarks, we have copyrights, we have patents, we have designs, we also have trade secrets per se. So let me just broadly give you some kind of a perspective on these areas during the work from home period. So ideally, I believe that if in case you're coming up with some kinds of new brand names during this period of COVID-19, then it's very, very essential that companies will have to quickly realize that it's very critical to go on immediately file trademarks for the said brand names, because I see that different kinds of companies are opening up new windows of business verticals and during this COVID-19, and I'm trying to explore new areas of business in order to keep their survival in the present business and market. That being the scenario, I think registration of trademarks would be assuming a greater significance, because you don't do that, again, it's going to bring in huge amounts of trademark related issues. Because in this era, where we're all trying to talk about the different kinds of protections, I think it's quickly a very important point that we realize that trademarks also will be playing a very, very essential role. Because I've seen so many different companies actually try to go ahead with some kinds of brand names, and they don't perform their trademark search, and they've gone investing money in the said trade names and brand names, and therefore end up getting legally sued, specifically left, right, and center from all over the globe. Because the major drawback that I'm able to see here in the landscape is that there's going to be a lot of problem, because in the physical operations you have your own legal team, you have certain advisors advising you on the trademark related issues. But given the work from home kind of a culture, I think the paradigm shift is not completely concentrating on protection of intellectual property, more so in the light where you're trying to come up with new business ideas and trying to come up with your own branding. Because I see that a lot of corporate companies are doing different kinds of business verticals altogether. Some people are also in the business of COVID related products. They're trying to sell them online. They're trying to distribute. They're trying to also do a lot of other kind of business activities apart from their regular business activities. So in this kind of a scenario, trademarks will be playing a very, very critical role. And this is just not for companies, but also individual businessmen also are trying to explore the uncharted territory of COVID related business activities. So, in this scenario, trademarks will be assuming a greater significance, because given the fact that whenever you have a brand name, when you start doing your business, trademarks are going to be playing a vital role in providing some kind of legal sanctity and legal ownership to your respective brand name. I think trademark law is very, very clear, stating that you don't have to wait till the time you actually get your trademark registered. So the moment you file your application, you can use the word TM in your brand name, and you can go on to actually get legal remedies for any kinds of unauthorized usage of the said trademark or brand name. So you have these kinds of opportunities which the law gives you. But I think in this scenario, companies and individuals will have to quickly realize that trademark protection is also the present requirement at the need of the hour. And secondly, I see that a lot of companies are also coming up with different kinds of softwares and different kinds of applications for the purpose of tracing or providing some kind of a COVID related services, or whether it's for the government, or whether it's for the individuals, or whether it's for any other entities. I think a lot of activities are happening across different verticals. Companies are quickly realizing that they can develop applications, software solutions, and platforms in this kind of an era. Well, in this scenario, it's very, very essential that you also take a go ahead and understand the value of copyright and the legal requirements per se. Because in this scenario, idea expression dichotomy is also playing a very critical role. Because we have been getting constant inquiries from a lot of companies that they're coming up with their own kind of computer programs, or coming up with their own kind of artistic works, and then well, they intend to seek some kind of a copyright protection for the same. But they're also trying to now quickly realizing that the employees work for hire and also idea expression dichotomy. A lot of people and companies think that ideas per se can be protected, but it's not the ideas that can be protected. Idea expression dichotomy very clearly outlines that it is the execution of the idea that is going to be protected, that can be protected per se. So in this scenario, a lot of companies are developing business plans, and a lot of employees are helping their companies craft these business plans by using the templates available from the internet. But quickly, we'll have to understand and realize that copyright will be playing a very critical role, because if you try to copy any of the templates of the business plans that are there available online, I think you can now be ready to be facing copyright infringements. Apart from that, I see that a lot of different kinds of awareness among the employees and the organizations is necessary in order to ensure that during the development phase of any kinds of application, specifically from work from home, these employees do not indulge in any kinds of copyright infringement. Because what's happening here is that there are two scenarios. One scenario is that the company, the employees are making use of their own personal laptops for the purpose of actually doing official work, which means that the official work that they're actually trying to do uh, from their personal laptop can also expose the said confidential information, which is going to be very critical to the other family members who are also making use of the laptop per se. So in this scenario, sharing of intellectual property also becomes inevitable, given the fact that in case there's only one laptop available with the family, and given the fact that online classrooms have begun for children and online classes have begun for teachers, it's a different ball game altogether. So it's no longer the IP protection strategies that were there earlier that will be relevant, but I think specific topical customized IP strategies would have to be defined by companies for the protection of copyright per se. This happens specifically with regard to the business plans and also the modules that have been drafted. And one of the most critical aspects that I would like to talk to you about here is the kind of infringement activity that can take place by an employee during the official course of employment. So, in case with or without the knowledge of the company, because the employee is working from home, in those scenarios, in case the employee breaches any of the intellectual property due for the purpose of official work, and who is said to be liable? I think that's an interesting question that's likely to crop up during this period of work from home culture. Because earlier we had very specific documentations and policies which are very specific to the physical environment and or the client related environment. But here, it's not just the intellectual property of the company, but sometimes the employees also are likely to handle the intellectual property belonging to the clients also. So that's also going to be one area that we'll have to quickly understand and quickly realize to protect the same. And when it comes to patents, there are a lot of patentable subject matters that are actually being developed by companies today because they have an intention that they feel they will have to come up with some kinds of a patent related subject matters specifically in the light of a new business that they're actually generating. I think in this scenario, patent protection also will be playing a critical role in case the companies are coming up with new innovations and inventions which are having a novelty, uniqueness, they're non-obvious, they're capable of industrial application, and then of course patentable subject matter per se. So in this scenario, companies are also trying to explore the other side of the coin by coming up with different kinds of patents relating to COVID protection and the like. And it will be and this kind of protection will also be playing an important role in the kind of intellectual property landscape during this work from home or COVID era. Apart from that, designs, a lot of companies who are actually into the kind of designing area per se are trying to come up with different kinds of designs, and then because they're entering into new fields of business, and I think these designs are being increasingly developed by employees. So we need to ensure as that these designs are not conflicting designs or not violating intellectual property belonging to someone else. I think this kind of a due diligence would also be required to be exercised for the said employee who's actually engaging in these kinds of development of designs. Because earlier it's a different matter altogether. I think now it's a entirely different matter per se. And not just that, these designs tomorrow be accessible by even the family members of the respective employee. I think IP protection strategies that line would also have to be looked into the practical difficulties and will have to be quickly defined because it's not the it's not the regular working environment, but it's a work from home related environment, which is entirely different to the IP landscape per se. And trade secrets, if you have any kinds of trade secrets, then what becomes important is in case how the trade secrets can be protected during the period of work from home. Are there enough strategies? Is there proper awareness among the employees? Is there proper protection to the trade secrets? What is the economic value of the trade secrets? And how do you ensure that they're protected well? I think all of these points will have to be key considerations by companies and individuals while actually trying to protect and actually trying to preserve intellectual property during work from home period per se. Next slide, please. I think there are a lot of IP agreements that are now assuming a greater significance during the work from home era. And one of the primary agendas that I would like to focus here is that these intellectual property related agreements would have to clearly define what's intellectual property in the context of work from home, because it's no longer just the limited dimensions that intellectual property has in the usual sense. But I think specific emphasis of making these intellectual property definition viable and workable to the work from home scenario will also be of essential importance. Not just that, the kind of access and the kind of restrictions will also have to be clearly defined with agreements so as to ensure that the intellectual property is protected and is accessed only by the said employee, and there's some kind of restriction made available in case the employees are actually making use of their personal laptops or personal devices for the purpose of creating and working for the companies, because it is there at this point that a lot of intellectual property gets generated. So it's not just the company's intellectual property. Sometimes in situations where the employees are actually engaged for a particular project and they go on to provide services with respect to that project, may also involve certain intellectual property belonging to the client. I think in these scenarios, it will be very important that the companies would have to not just protect the intellectual property of themselves, but also they protect the intellectual property of the said client. I think documentation and agreements also need to specify this particular kind of a point for protecting the client's intellectual property as well. And apart from that, the confidential obligations would have to be revised and be made specific in the case of work from home scenarios. This is also very, very essential. And some kinds of reasonable efforts would also have to be maintained or exercised by the employee in order to maintain secrecy of the said intellectual property related information. Because this is where employee awareness and trainings are going to be playing a very critical role in terms of educating and making the employee aware of how we can protect the intellectual property of the company and also the client at the same time also continue to work from home scenario. So I think these are going to be key considerations of any IP agreement that is to be drafted during the period of work from home per se. These agreements are definitely required because it's a different ball game altogether. I think that this is also going to be of immense importance when we talk of protecting intellectual property in terms of work from home culture per se. Next slide. I think there are also the requirement of coming up with different IP arrangement strategies, and it's very important that people have to quickly realize that the need to know basis would have to be clearly defined because the control physically is not available with the company, got to the employee. Employees work from home, is working from home, and therefore is accessing or getting access or has a proper license in some cases regard to the intellectual property of the company as well as the clients. So in this scenario, the need to know basis becomes very important, more specifically when there is a remote kind of an operation and control, remote control of the employees, uh, because companies would not be able to exercise complete physical control as in the earlier scenarios in work from home cultures. I think work for hire needs to also be specifically defined in the light of work from home, failing which the intellectual property created and generated out of work from home may again lead to IP conflicts and IP related issues. IP assignments and IP transfers would also have to be adequately looked into by companies and also individuals in case they're having some kinds of engagement of employees or consultants or freelancers for the purpose of doing any kinds of work for them or render any services on their behalf. So in these scenarios, I think it's also adequately important that companies would have to actually go ahead and update their existing documentation, whether it's the non-disclosure agreements or whether it's the IP transfer, IP assignment, or any other kinds of agreements and policies. Because what really becomes very important is these should be made applicable to work from home. Not just that, I would advocate that specific IP protection strategies and policies would have to be looked into. And what goes on to be part of these policies are not just the regular wordings, but I think customizing them to the requirement of having work for hire and having IP assignment, IP transfer, need to know basis, confidential obligations specifically defined under the work from home scenarios. I think all of these would have to be brought in, and some amount of due diligence also has to be brought in on the part of the employee while actually working from home, because it's a different matter altogether. and inadvertently there can be some disclosure of intellectual property, and that can again lead to some kind of IP infringement per se. Not just that, I think specific back-to-back agreements are required even in case of intellectual property protection with the clients. Companies also have to quickly realize that they amend the existing IP-related agreements with clients in order to ensure that the specific work from home parameters are also included, and there are no kinds of IP related issues thereof. And I would also advise that there are a lot of cyber and data and IP insurances also that are being made available today, and it will be advisable for companies and people who are actually trying to work from home to have these adequate insurances in place in order to ensure that there, in case there is any kinds of IP infringement, the said insurance gives you a good coverage. Recently, we were actually trying to value one of the policies of this company called Bajaj Allianz, because one of our clients was actually wanting to protect their intellectual property during the phase of COVID-19 and protect any IP infringement per se. So it was very interesting to look at the grounds on which the insurance specifically covers IP infringement. The insurance specifically talks about two major aspects. One is the basic due diligence being executed by the employee, and second, was it done beyond the control of the company? I think these two were the parameters to actually assess and provide some kind of an insurance coverage of IP related infringements per se. So I think that was a very interesting scenario to examine. But needless to say, I think given the fact that there is a very limited control of companies over the employees, it will be very interesting that all these kinds of additional coverages also can be used for protection of intellectual property, failing which they can lead to a lot of IP related infringements per se. I think these are some arrangements that need to be looked into during the period of work from home. Next slide, please. Yeah. So before I get into the cases, I thought I should just also take you through some kinds of understanding on the specific requirements. See, because what really happens is there is a lot of different kinds of scenarios that are happening today, and let me talk to you about some scenarios wherein it was very difficult and challenging for companies to actually prove their innocence in IP infringement cases. So we had a client of us who actually tried to was working for one particular organization, and then they were executing a particular project, and in came in a trouble when they found that their particular information was actually the information which was disclosed by the employee inadvertently on the internet. So they went on to send legal notices not just to the employee but also to the company per se. So the company was handicapped because they had not had sufficient ammunition in terms of their legal policies, and actually back to back suing the respective employee for the sake for the breach of intellectual property infringement. And as a result, they suffered damages. They had to pay huge amount of money as compensation, and criminal charges also were trying to be levied, but with great difficulty, things got sorted out. I think it's very essential that this point will have to be clearly looked into. And not just that, storage of certain information also, or in a way where it is having some kind of if there's some kind of an IP attached to it, then storing that inappropriately also can be considered as a negligence activity on the part of the prospective employee. That's also something that I would want to discuss in a work from home scenario altogether. Because usually what happens is when you are working in a physical environment, you actually work on the data and then you surrender. Sometimes companies do not allow you to get your own devices. You work on the company's devices, you leave them at the office, and then you come home. So therefore, the IP risks are entirely different. But in a scenario like this, when you're suddenly, unprecedentedly, you are supposed to work from home, and in case the company is unable to give you any kinds of devices, and you are asked to work from your own personal device, then it's a completely different subject matter altogether. Because anything that you do, any activity that you do that is going to act prejudice to the intellectual property of the company can land you in any kinds of legal trouble including infringement activities per se. Because directly or indirectly contributory negligence and contributory liability can be initiated against you. Sometimes even um, strict liability in case you're using any other device. I see that some people are actually making use of devices which are available from different vendors. Vendors are giving some kind of a lease kind of an arrangement of laptops to the respective employees. So in these scenarios also, it's going to be a different ball game altogether. And apart from that, I see that in some scenarios, one of the major drawbacks that I've seen during COVID-19 is the remote access. People have these remote accessing tools, whether it's AnyDesk or TeamViewer or something like that. In case there is some issue with the laptop, the company will ask its IT guys who are either in-house or external to actually log on to the said system using these remote accessing tools and set the system right. But in these scenarios, what if there is an inadvertent copy or if there is some copy of intellectual property done? Who's going to be accountable? I think that's also a very interesting question that is likely to pop up. Because we had one of these scenarios that I would like to discuss here as part of this work from home, because the company actually engaged these guys who are remote guys, but these guys happen to somehow get the intellectual property of the company copied onto their system using this particular remote accessing tool. But in these scenarios, who's going to be liable for such IP infringement? Is it the company because they've engaged the said external party, or is the employee going to be holding accountability or responsibility? Because these are two questions that will have to be clearly understood while you're accessing the scope of liability of the said infringement. So, employee, in case he has not exercised his due diligence, he has not protected the intellectual property in a proper manner, then would also be accountable for the said infringement activity. I think these are very interesting challenges and questions, shall I say, in terms of work from home per se. Next slide, please. Another very interesting scenario that we got was that we had one of the employees actually in one company try to violate the and copy the code onto his personal system from his official system per se. And the reason that he gave was the official system was not properly operating, and because there was a good dependency on this guy with regard to timeline, the company has actually facilitated the said transfer. But later on, the company was very suspicious whether there is any kinds of you know uh, issue that has happened in his personal laptop, because we don't have any idea who's going to be accessing the personal laptop of the said employee. What if the information gets out into the public domain? What happens to the intellectual property in those cases? Who's going to be liable? That was a very interesting question that came to me. Well, that's one side of the coin. Other side of the coin is that we found that during this period of COVID-19, one of the employees was actually given an IP license to a particular software product for doing a demo for the respective clients. So this happened way back in last May, but today, I mean, just 4 days back, we found that this particular employee has misused the kind of license being given to him with regard to the said software, the IP license, and he went on to create something similar, and then he went on to actually go ahead and approach the said client by offering by intending to offer the said product at almost 50% of the price what the company is quoting. Well, this guy is still employed by the company, but what becomes important is IP licensing would have to be clearly defined in terms of work from home scenarios, because merely having these agreements in the physical format is not going to be of much consequence and use, because in case any of these agreements, including the IP strategies, IP policies, NDAs, and if you have any assignment agreements, transfer agreements, or any work for hire related agreements or clauses, I think all of these will have to be quickly defined in the light of work from home, and failing which, in case of any such issues, the company would have to actually be facing IP related infringement activities and suits, because it's a different ball game altogether. And I think it's high time that the companies actually try to realize the applicability of the same to work from home per se. And apart from that, in case of termination, see, we are also seeing a lot of intellectual property being violated in terms of termination, because there are so many different challenges that companies and employees are facing today because of the termination being one of the major areas of COVID related legal issues. I have actually practically seen so many different cases that companies don't pay attention to the exit policies, specifically from an intellectual property protection perspective during the period of work from home. So once they let go of the employees and they're on a notice period, what are going to be the IP challenges is going to be has to be specifically understood, and specific clauses and policies would have to be drafted in the said lines, because sometimes there is a dependency on the guy, and he has to make the knowledge transfer, and he has to actually provide sometimes some kind of training. All these would be playing very critical roles, but I think in these lights, IP strategies also would have to be clearly drafted, keeping in view these kinds of issues also, in order to ensure that there is a proper IP protection even during the notice period with regard to work from home, or with regard to termination of employees and exit of the employees. This is also something that's constantly happening. And what becomes important is when an employee is working on his own personal laptop, there's also one another scenario that I would like to tell you. I don't want to name the client, but it was a different kind of a case that came to me. So just imagine that during the work from home, the said company was unable to provide any kinds of devices to to the respective employee. An employee was asked to work for the company using his own personal laptop. Well, end of the project, the company thought that they would do some kind of an audit with regard to the kind of a laptop being used by the employee for their official work. So they actually requested the employee, rather not requested, they actually informed the employee that they are planning to do an audit, and asked them to connect through any desk for the purpose of remote access to the said device. Lo and behold, the employee provided access to the said device, but however, uh, one day later, this employee actually legally sued the respective company for violating his intellectual property, which he had developed out of course of his official employment. So he alleged that the company has actually violated and infringed upon his intellectual property that he has created. He's created some intellectual property by writing some software programs, and all of them, since it was his personal laptop also, were accessed, and some of them were also or deleted. Is what his claim was in that respective notice. I think these are new kinds of IP related challenges that people are facing during the period of work from home. And I think adequately protecting intellectual property becomes very, very essential in this scenario. And apart from that, also clearly defining and going ahead and not just protecting the intellectual property, but preservation of intellectual property also is the present required thing that the companies will have to clearly understand. And inadvertent disclosure to any of the members, can it be considered uh, inadvertent disclosure to any of the household members of the family or to third parties? Uh, can it actually uh, be considered as an IP infringement? Is also one question that people have to quickly realize. I think these are some illustrations to just tell you how exposed we can be. And not just that, I think one of the biggest challenges is also happening with regard to the cyber attacks that are taking place, because the employees who are actually supposed to maintain and preserve the intellectual property of the company are also inadvertently ending up in getting their systems prone to cyber attacks. And as a result, there's a huge intellectual property related violation that has taken place, and the companies are ending up uh, um, losing a lot of damage, and a lot of loss is actually hitting the companies in this scenario as well. So all round, I can tell you that intellectual property in the context of work from home is going to be very, very critical. And quickly, if they'll have to come up with adequate strategies and also make the employees aware and come up with some guidelines, failing which it will be a different matter altogether per se. I think broadly, these are some things that I would advise and I would actually recommend for companies or for individuals who are actually trying to work from home during this period of COVID-19. And intellectual property will be playing a very different kind of a role, and we should also consider filing these intellectual properties, registering them in case you feel that there's going to be valuable information versus keeping this information as a risk of disclosure. I think these are also some things that we'll have to quickly realize in protecting our IP assets per se. So apart from this, there are also going to be additional intellectual property considerations. I think intellectual property protection is well defined across the globe, but the variation in laws, because given the kind of different laws that countries have, I think it's also advisable that we'll have to quickly realize the same. And one of the most important aspect of IP protection is the mindset. I think that's what is going to make company who's actually providing work from home kind of a culture protect the critical intellectual property per se, because um, this has to be the regular habit right from the time. Even HRs of companies would have to also pay attention to this fact of protecting the IP of the company, because right from the time that you're actually onboarding somebody until the time of having daily meetings, daily schedules, I think intellectual property will have to be protected in as part of all of these aspects. And I believe that these steps, including a periodic review of what is unique and what has to be protected, uh, what is the kind of mindset, what are the kinds of IP created out of the said services by an employee or by consultants, would also be the aspect the company should consider per se. I think awareness, deliberations, and action support operations, creativity, and legal protections are equally important uh, in a work from home kind of a culture that not only protects the intellectual property, but it also helps the owners of intellectual property to actually leverage the advantages that they have. Because I see that a lot of different companies are coming up with IP licensing, IP assignment, because they want to actually monetize their IP during this period of COVID-19 and work from home scenario. But I think adequate strategies and layers of access and restrictions would have to be considered, because commonly all of these data is somewhere stored in the cloud, and in case of any kinds of issues, can the data itself, which is entirely stored on the cloud by the company, be protected appropriately? That's also something that we'll have to constantly aware of. And the layers of access that has been made available in the cloud also needs to be looked into, while actually trying to understand the access and restrictions on who can obtain access to the said intellectual property or the said related trade secrets or and the information that is critical per se. I think all of these pointers will quickly help in coming up with some background. I will act as some background pointers and checks for the purpose of protecting intellectual property during the COVID-19 time per se. So with these, I think more or less I have touched on some broad areas, and I will be more than happy if we have any questions and discussions. Because ultimately, I believe the interactions in the forum are also going to be the key catalysts and pointers in actually trying to make the discussion more interactive, and more discussions can make way for IP legal jurisprudence during this period of work from home per se. So I'm open to any questions. Once again, thank FICCI and also Divyesh and also Mona Lisa for this opportunity. And I think it'll be very interesting to actually have some discussions and deliberations. Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to you this evening.
Um, Thank you so much for such an insightful session, sir. Am I audible to you?
Yeah, yeah, you're audible, please.
Yes, sir. I now proceed to Q&A session. If anyone from the audience has any question, please type the same in the chat box. Sir, there is a question from a participant. The
Okay,
participant
please go
wants you
ahead.
to throw some, yes, sir. The participant wants you to throw some light on trade secret theft from an internal employee of the company, and what can they as a company do to protect it, especially when it's clients' behavioral data. and when the employee is working from home using a laptop provided by the company itself.
Okay, so can you repeat the question once more? I heard one part, I didn't hear one part of a question. The second part is
Sure,
clear. Can
sir.
you repeat the first part?
Sure, sir. Sir, can you please throw some light on trade secret theft from an internal employee of the company? And what
Okay.
can the participant as a company do to protect it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. See, trade secrets usually are determined based on two parameters, that is the monetary value and also the kind of the applicability that they have. So, given these scenarios, companies would have to come up with specific strategies and policies for protection. Like some guidelines need to be drafted and some by the company for protecting the same. The same need to be circulated also with the employees. And suppose the employee then exercises or does not exercise his due diligence and then goes on to actually take the possession of this said trade secret illegally or unauthorizedly, then the company can definitely sue him for legal damages. There'll be three options that you can actually do. You can actually go ahead and exercise your civil remedies by sending a legal notice and also going ahead and actually getting an injunction order from the court. Second, filing a criminal case thereof for IP infringement. Third case, also seeking administrative remedy, which includes that in case the said employee has possessed the trade secret in his laptop or in his hard drive, then the court will also order for confiscation of the same and they will hand over that they would like to exercise. But primarily, I would advise that they have a good IP policy in place so that at least they're able to demonstrate due diligence of themselves before going ahead and actually exercising legal remedies.
Uh, yes, sir. In continuance to the same question, the participant wants to know what to do when the laptop is provided by the company itself and how to protect the data when it's behavioral data of the clients.
How to protect the data when it is when the laptop is provided by the company itself, right?
Yes, sir. And the data is behavioral data of the clients.
Okay. See, I would advise that there can be some kinds of measures that companies can take. You can take reasonable security practices and procedures. That means you can have some technical measures like some kind of firewalls, some kind of protection mechanisms. And second, you can actually try to instigate the employee to actually keep a backup of the same and then also share the backup with the company. Third, also have some kind of an access control over the said device so that there's a lesser chance that the employee will be able to actually go ahead and transfer the same to any other third party. And fourth, ensure that there are regular audits being carried out on the laptop by the company to understand how secured is the respective data being maintained by the employee. So technical, managerial, and operational and financial. If these four kinds of measures can be adopted, I think it's reasonably safe. But 100% securing it can only be a myth. These can be only the reasonable measures that companies can actually adopt with help of these measures. They will be able to at least exercise some due diligence and get some understanding on the kind of usage of the same Z system by the employee.
Absolutely, sir.
The question, what do
Sir,
you have?
there is a question from a participant.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, whether litigation or arbitration will be better and
Whether
cost-effective
litigation?
option for the company? Sir, which one
I
will
would
be
say
the
it all depends on the value of the intellectual property. Suppose it's having huge value, then I would say definitely see litigation can also definitely help you in actually protecting the kind of intellectual property, because we have a lot of examples of the kind of protection orders being issued by the Court of Justice, and then I think yes, definitely nothing comes free or nothing comes without any cost. But if you think that the value of the said intellectual property that's breached or that's infringed upon has a really big value, then going ahead for litigation can be a very good option per se.
Yes, sir.
But there are also other options that are available. See, if you can go ahead and exercise your civil remedies. Like, you have, whenever there is IP infringement, you can send out notices at the first level, and you at least some response can be evoked through these notices. So I think this is sometimes, I'd seen in my experience that when we start issuing these legal notices of infringement notices to companies or to individuals, at least they respond. So there is some kind of a concrete response that you get, and then that will be able to determine whether you have to go for litigation or whether you can sort out the issue without litigation. I think these can be good options if you want to go ahead and save costs per se, but not in all cases. But this can also be one of the options that companies can look into.
Yes, sir. Sir, there is a comment by a participant. Is
Please go
there
ahead.
any way to value the damage of IP caused due to such theft?
Sorry, I didn't get you. Is there any?
Is there any way to value the damage of IP caused due to such theft of trade secret?
Yes. Yes, you have IP valuation that is actually done basically, and that IP valuation should be able to roughly tell you the costs of the kind of trade secret, and thereby you can go ahead and ascertain the approximate damage costs that are likely to evolve as a result of this breach of this particular trade secret per se. So just like you have the physical valuation, there's also intellectual property valuation, which is called IP valuation per se.
Yes, absolutely. Do we have any more questions from the participants? I guess we have no more questions. Um, Thank you so much for addressing the questions, sir. It was
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
having you in today's session.
Sorry,
Thank you, sir.
I lost you. I mean, but you were saying something.
Yes, sir. Um, you were saying something. Please carry on.
You were saying something. I lost you suddenly.
Okay, sir. Thank you for being a part of this virtual school, sir.
Thank you, thank you. It's been a great learning experience for me because coming and sharing these kind of information to the participants, I think I was literally very, very excited and very happy, and it gave me a lot of good learning experience, and it was a great journey, I can tell you, on my experience with PC, Virtual School of IP, and once again, I must really appreciate and the thought leadership carried on by FICCI, because there are very, very few people who are actually focusing on these areas. I think the emerging technologies and also this work from home related aspects, I think more and more discussions and deliberations need to happen, because these issues are never constantly the same. They keep on evolving with the evolution of time. And with each passing day, month, and a year, I think it's going to be a different landscape altogether. And I really feel that FICCI IP is really contributing as a key catalyst to determine the IP legal jurisprudence with regard to the emerging technologies, and also with the evolving uh, standards like work from home scenarios, etc. So I once again congratulate them for this wonderful initiative, and also all the participants who are part of this wonderful virtual school of IP, and specifically Divyesh, who's been instrumental in getting me here, and also Mona Lisa for this wonderful host of these three sessions. I really enjoyed all my three sessions. Hope to connect up with you in the near future as well. Thank you, participants. Thank you, FICCI. Thank you, Divyesh. Thank you, Mona Lisa. It's been lovely talking to you this evening.
Thank you so much, sir, for the kind words. And we absolutely agree with your comments on the evolving technologies and their relation to IP. It was wonderful having you in our sessions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for being a part of day 3, session 2 of the virtual school on IP. We now conclude this session. We shall now proceed to session 3 of the day.